Housemarque's Returnal is a shining example of what the studio is capable of, packing tight gameplay together with an interesting world. It's not often that a game successfully blends a compelling story, tight combat, and gorgeous environments into one package, but anyone doubting Housemarque's capability to do so with Returnal can rest easy. While the roguelike game seems somewhat antithetical to PlayStation's blockbuster focus, it's one of the standout experiences of the last 5 years. Returnal follows the spacefaring ASTRA scout Celine after she crash lands on the mysterious planet Atropos, which is host to all manner of hostile lifeforms. Each time Celine dies, she's plopped back at the wreckage of her ship, most of her items and progress reset, and the planet's layout changing. It's the perfect setup for a roguelike game, and Housemarque absolutely nails the follow-through. Laser-focused on creating tight gameplay mechanics, Returnal boasts the same one-more-run appeal that's commonly found in the upper echelons of video game design. With smashingly well-received roguelikes like Hades releasing last year, fans could be forgiven for wondering if Returnal feels derivative, but Housemarque's creation is as fresh as anyone could ask for. There's a heavy emphasis on making players try new things to succeed, whether that's a change in tactics or testing new gear. While not every weapon in the game is a winner, the rapid-firing, but low-damage Hollow Seeker being the most apparent example, most of Returnal's arsenal is fun to use. The carbine and shotgun, which players will unlock early on, are standouts, but there are some unique options too, like the Rotgland Lobber, which shoots poison globs at foes and causes damage over time. As players progress through a run, they'll build weapon proficiency, which in turn leads to more powerful weapons dropping. Finding powerful weapons is key to making it through the later stages, as lower-powered weapons will start to feel ineffective quickly. However, each gun does have a powerful alt-fire mode, which usually manifests a satisfying blast that whittles away an enemy's health bar with gusto. Those alt-fire modes are lifesavers during runs where good weapons just don't seem to drop, though those instances are few and far between. It'd be criminal not to emphasize how stellar Returnal's use of the DualSense controller is, as it sets the bar for all PlayStation exclusives moving forward. It's not the constant barrage of vibration that players experienced in Astro's Playroom, but Returnal utilizes the controller more practically and compellingly. Returnal's opening cutscene is as excellent of a showcase as one could ask for, with players feeling every bump and scrape the ship experiences. It's something that legitimately needs to be felt to fully understand, as words can't quite do it justice. In fact, one of the only downsides of Returnal is that there's no option to replay the full intro. Cutscenes aside, players will also feel the rain softly tapping against the controller, the burst of their dash move, shots firing off, and a lot more. All of that is coupled with gripping sound design, further highlighted by the PlayStation Pulse headset's 3D audio. Those components add up to a game that looks, sounds, and feels amazing to play, a deadly combination for anyone that needs to get to bed at a reasonable hour. Returnal can be a brutally difficult experience, with runs often ending in the first biome. That's in part because it doesn't force players forward as much as some other roguelikes do, allowing them to backtrack and explore the map to find more powerful gear. That exploration is often necessary, as items are a key component in making progress. However, Returnal does make players gamble more than its contemporaries through Malignancy and Parasites, two top-tier gameplay mechanics that can dramatically change how a run progresses, for better or for worse. Malignancy is a sort of space curse that players pick up from certain items. Each item with Malignancy is clearly marked, with players forced to choose whether or not it's worth chancing the negative effects by picking the item up. Essentially, Malignancy has a variety of randomized drawbacks, ranging from raising the cooldown timer for alt-fire modes to adding fall damage. To cure Malignancy, players have to complete mini-challenges, which add an interesting layer to each run. Parasites operate similarly, but have a much clearer cost-benefit trade-off when it comes to their use, with their effects being labeled before a player picks them up. Returnal incorporates elements from far beyond the roguelike genre though. It's a successful blend of bullet hell, Metroidvania, and even some horror segments. A big chunk of the game's narrative takes place in a mysterious house that, at times, seems to be partially inspired by the ill-fated horror demo PT. The house sequences are some of the game's shining moments, and by far the biggest drive to unravel the game's other mysteries. Returnal's narrative isn't necessarily the focus though. That doesn't make it bad, but much of what players learn is derived from environmental storytelling. Essentially, players are trying to work out what's causing the planet to loop, what happened to the sentient race that inhabited the planet, and slowly piecing together parts of Celine's past. Audio logs are scattered around the planet, usually on a past Celine's corpse, that detail some of what's happened on Atropos. Returnal also sees players decipher some of the lost species' language to read obelisks that give insight into the events that transpired there. The entire planet has a vibe similar to Alien or Prometheus, which works well for it. There are also some interesting online elements for Returnal players to take part in. A leaderboard system for special, single-run challenges will show how players stack up globally or against their friends in single-run, score attack challenges, something Housemarque has included in prior titles, though it's been iterated on and tweaked for Returnal. Players will also happen upon the corpses of other fallen players from time to time, where they can avenge or scavenge them for additional items. Avenging a player will lead to a difficult fight, but it's a wonderfully gripping challenge. According to developer Housemarque, the lack of a difficulty setting in Returnal was a completely deliberate decision. In an interview with Push Square, marketing director Michael Haveri revealed that difficulty control is integrated into Returnal's overall gameplay design. While players may not be able to turn sliders to manipulate difficulty, the way they approach each level, whether aggressively or conservatively, could determine whether the chances of surviving a particular level. However, this does not mean that the game would automatically adjust the difficulty depending on the number of deaths players incur. Instead, when players play more and more, they would eventually open more pathways, better understand enemies, obtain better weapons and health upgrades, and make the path ahead a little bit easier. The way difficulty is designed in Returnal is interesting, given that removing standard difficulty options ensures that all players experience the game in the same way. One thing players should keep in mind is that while Returnal players will return to a certain point every time they die, some upgrades are permanently carried over. Similar to other roguelike games, the more players die, the stronger they could get. Returnal's gameplay design allows players to have a fighting chance by getting better at each level by gaining new abilities and grinding for weapons and upgrades, increasing their chances of surviving a level. However, for players who may need additional help in traversing Returnal's levels, there is a way to tone down the difficulty by a bit. Heading into the game's settings and switching to the gameplay tab, players can decrease difficulty a bit by turning up the aim assist to high. It is worth noting that doing this setting won't make enemies weaker, but it could help players who may not be good at aiming. Having aim assist set to high would allow players to focus on dodging attacks while ensuring that their aim is precise. While this may help some players, it should be noted that it only decreases difficulty by a tiny margin. However, if players ever find themselves running low on integrity, there is a simple trick to top off their health bar. Step 1. Find the nearest teleporter and select a location that is near Celine's ship. If players have not yet unlocked the teleport mechanic, they can run back to the ship, but that method is a little more time-consuming and requires consulting the Returnal map a lot. Step 2. Go into the crashed ship and head to the left. Step 3. Pass through 2 doors and there should be a bed to Celine's left. This bed will have an interact prompt, hold triangle on the default control scheme. Step 4. Celine will sleep for a bit within the ship and usually have some form of mysterious dream. When she awakes, head out of the ship. Celine's integrity bar should have replenished by about half, depending on the damage that the player has taken. Step 5. If the integrity bar is not full, head back into the ship and sleep again. It's important to mention that this Returnal health trick only works in the first biome, so it won't help players once they progress to the second area. But for those who are finding the first biome challenging, some players are finding Returnal as a whole difficult and review bombing Metacritic, then this will help them worry less about their HP. On top of that, if players want to be extra prepared when they advance past the first biome, they can leave all resin/silphium items, which grant integrity/HP, on the map and only heal by returning to the ship. Then once players have cleared out the biome and either are ready to advance or fight Returnal's first boss, they can pick up all of the silphium or resin after healing at the ship. This will increase their max integrity and give Celine a lot more HP to work with as she progresses through the game. Housemarque's Returnal is taking PS5 players by storm, with a mysterious story involving time loops steeped in Greek mythology references. Another key element in the success of Returnal is its mysterious story, filled with a Lovecraftian sense of existential dread, monumental scenery infusing players with a sentiment of pooniness, and a seemingly inescapable, endless time loop. Housemarque's use of Greek mythology references throughout the entirety of Returnal injects every scene with a connotation of epic tales lost in time. Returnal is not the first game to feature elements from Greek mythology, with other games centering their story around these elements. Among the most obvious there is Hades, which shares far more than Greek mythology with Returnal in the form of roguelite elements, and less obvious games like Borderlands. The main character in Housemarque's sci-fi game is Celine, a Greek-American space explorer landing on the off-limits planet called Atropos. In Greek mythology, Celine is the goddess of the moon, and the character displays beautiful heterochromia, with a bright blue eye and a darker one. Some fans believe that her heterochromia is a way to represent the dark side of the moon, which is a very poetic element if true. Atropos, on the other hand, in Greek mythology is one of three women, the Moirai, or Moire being the incarnation of destiny. These women were in charge of making sure that all mortal or divine beings lived their lives as destined, with Clotho being the one who spins the thread life, Lachesis measuring the thread, and Atropos cutting the thread and determining the way life ended. With this in mind, it's easy to see why the planet in Returnal is called Atropos, as the planet determines the cause and the moment for Celine's demise each time she dies. However, Celine's loop always starts back at the beginning, after her ship is shot down. Celine's ship, the Helios, is also a reference to the Greek god of the sun and brother to Celine. Later, it's implied that Helios could also be Celine's son in the timeline where she returns to Earth. Another connection to ancient mythology is that the currency found in the game is called obolites, the Greek obols, and the same coins used in Hades. Upon dying, players lose all their obolites, and this could be yet another hidden reference to Hellenic myths. In fact, when at the time people died, they were believed to cross the river Styx in order to reach the underworld. However, the boatman carrying them Charon required payment for the journey, and so the dead were buried with coins they could carry in the afterlife to pass the river safely. Maybe Celine has to lose her obolites so that she can start the loop again. Returnal features several bosses too, with each of them named after a being from Greek mythology. Phrike is the Greek spirit of horror, with the word literally meaning shivering. Ixion was, according to the myths, the son of Ares, the god of war, and the murderer of his bride's father, for which reason he was exiled. In Returnal, Ixion is chained in an arena-like area, which in a way is fitting for both elements. Then Nemesis is the boss encountered when Celine tries to understand what White Shadow is. In Hellenic mythology, she is the goddess of retribution, and in the game she is in a sense her own nemesis. Lastly, there are the two titans, Hyperion and Ophion, with the former being the ruler of the world before Zeus and father to Celine, and the latter being the first king of heaven, overthrown by Cronus, the god of time. The game has been enjoying an overwhelming and increasing amount of positive reviews up to now, but unfortunately, there is a trend of it receiving multiple negative reviews in a row that are lowering its overall score. Some of these reviews do include a few fair points, but even when arguably legitimate things are said, they largely do not warrant scores of 1 or even 0 out of 10. Review bombing is a phenomenon that saw a significant increase in frequency because of how accessible reviewing games or movies has become. This happens especially when there is little to no oversight on the content of these reviews, just like what Returnal witnessed a few days after release. Most of the time, this results in indie titles not garnering the players they would if the highlighted reviews were more honest. On the other hand, review bombing can also have the opposite effect and attract more customers. However, Returnal's review bombing stems from criticism of the game's design decisions. It is not uncommon for games that are generating a lot of discussions to witness an increase in sales precisely because of the publicity the negative reviews can foster. Whether or not this is going to be the case for Returnal, the very act of review bombing it is pointless at its core. Regardless of how much negative feedback a game can receive, justified or not, there will always be people who love the game for what it brings to the table, for its originality, for its story, for its exciting and intense gameplay, or other reasons. Returnal feels good to play, especially so with the DualSense technology from PS5's controllers. Considering how some games can end up releasing unfinished or with numerous technical issues, housemarque did a great job with its creative endeavor not to fall within this category. Returnal, like any other game really, is one that's going to please many people and upset others. Some players are lowering Returnal's review ratio on release for reasons such as the price tag, the difficulty, or the fact that players lose most of the things they acquired during a run upon death. These are reasonable motives for disliking the game, but they don't justify comparably miserable scores. One of the most hated features, or, in this case, lack thereof, in Returnal seems to be how players cannot save their progress while playing and stopping the run. Even then, housemarque has acknowledged the community's feedback, and will do something about the save feature in the future. There is still nothing official in terms of what this will entail, but the developers of Returnal have indeed shown a profound passion towards their work, and the care poured into the game really shows. Furthermore, negative reviews can and should entice players enjoying Returnal into sharing more positive feedback about what the game does right, which is far more than it does wrong. Returnal is considered a masterpiece by many, even with some of its minor complaints in regards to bugs or design choices. One major and perhaps game-breaking bug has recently popped up, however, surrounding the newest update of Returnal. Earlier today, fans were reporting issues with update 1.3.3 of Returnal. The patch was originally supposed to address stability issues, fix trophy problems, pre-order suit issues, adjust certain custom controller mappings, address numerous bug fixes, and more. However, now developer housemarque has pulled the update entirely, and is telling anyone who has updated the game to uninstall Returnal entirely. According to a barrage of tweets from housemarque, patch 1.3.3 of Returnal has been pulled, and the game has been reverted back to 1.3.1 until the issues are resolved. According to housemarque, players will get a CE 100028-1 error code based on the update when they attempt to boot the game up. To be safe, the developer is suggesting uninstalling the game altogether and reinstalling it back to the 1.3.1 reverted state. As far as what will happen if someone attempts to play Returnal with the 1.3.3 update, housemarque does not mention anything in the tweets, perhaps for now to avoid additional PR disasters. But according to comments below these tweets, players have reported completely corrupted saves and lost progress, meaning the update 1.3.3 has entirely broken the game. Many players booted up update 1.3.3 of Returnal expecting a fix to trophy problems in the game. There were individuals who were very close to completing the game, and had to wait for the bugged trophies to be fixed to platinum the game. But instead of being able to finish Returnal, the update has completely reset the progress, according to players. This game-breaking update is obviously very infuriating for many. housemarque pulled the update, and the team will be working on a new update for all of the problems that were being addressed in update, but the damage is done. Many fans have been review bombing Returnal simply because they cannot save progress in the middle of a multi-hour run. Although the game has exciting and intense gameplay with an intriguing narrative, the internet can come together to bomb a review based on a single complaint. But this update could be much bigger. There are commenters already asking for refunds, for example, and individuals who once were enjoying the game are extremely frustrated and unhappy. Review bombing does not always have the desired effect, and sometimes games that become popular at a later date, or are already at the time of this phenomenon, are not impacted by it at all. Games like The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Nier Automata, Grand Theft Auto V, and Borderlands 3, in the form of Borderlands 2 on Steam, have all been review bombed at some point, for different reasons. Still, this fact didn't prevent these games from becoming the great titles they are today, and it didn't hurt player retention. Here's to hoping that Returnal follows in their footsteps, especially considering the immediate and genuinely concerned response from developer housemarque. In modern rogue games, players have utilized a feature on consoles that most take for granted, which is putting their consoles or devices into rest mode. Players can cause the console to enter a low-power state whereupon waking the device, gameplay can be resumed normally from where the player left off. It is also the primary way for Returnal players to save their progress during a cycle, as most cycles are notoriously long to play in one sitting. However, players who rely on this function will need to be aware of PS5's auto-update ahead of tomorrow's patch. Returnal's developer housemarque tweeted out a PSA warning players who are currently in a rested cycle to turn off auto-update prior to May 5 at noon in PDT. The reason for the tweet is because of how auto-update works for PS5 owners, forcing the games to shut down completely in order to update games to their latest version. In the past, updates would be scheduled, giving players a prompt to update the game before resuming gameplay, but at the cost of convenience, players in the middle of a Returnal cycle will lose their progress from the forced shutdown. housemarque is aware of its players' criticism involving Returnal's unforgiving save system after recently reposting a Reddit post about a player losing over 2 hours of progress and forcing themselves to reset in order to save while losing their current loadout. In the Reddit post, opinions were polarized, with several Redditors disagreeing the need for a save function as it would diminish the integrity of a roguelike genre. Others were in agreement with the original Redditor, but offered the option of save states akin to checkpoints, allowing players to continue but deleting their save state as they resume gameplay. While opinions are currently polarized, housemarque acknowledged the critiques and has hinted toward an alternative in preserving players' progress in Returnal. Players who do not wish to lose their progress will once again need to be mindful of their auto-update settings until they feel ready to update their game manually. Returnal is an excellent video game flirting with perfection. It has the most satisfying gameplay loop housemarque has crafted to date, which says a lot considering the studio's pedigree. If PlayStation's other PS5 exclusives feel even half as satisfying as Returnal does, fans are in for one hell of a console generation. When the PlayStation 5 launched last November, one of its most notable features was the brand new DualSense controller. Set to be a tech demo of sorts for the DualSense, Astro's Playroom was a well-received pack-in game that ignited the imaginations of PlayStation fans across the globe over the potential of the new controller. Astro's Playroom featured all sorts of interesting ways for the controller to be used, from the trigger's haptic feedback to the 3D audio. It seemed like every element of the game was incorporating the DualSense in some way or another. When people got their hands on other PS5 launch titles, however, it seemed as if many of the exclusive DualSense features had been forgotten about by game makers. Nothing had come anywhere near Astro's Playroom in terms of controller functionality until Returnal. Based on the early reception of Returnal, it looks like it is the first game since Astro's Playroom to really utilize the PS5's DualSense controller in a meaningful way. The most immersive uses of haptics ever in a video game, bar none, Returnal might just be the final proof of concept needed for other studios to see just how incredible the DualSense can be. In a similar vein, it's quite hype-inducing for one of many upcoming Insomniac Games titles. Ever since the release of Sunset Overdrive back in 2014, Insomniac has become a household gaming name. With last year's Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and the upcoming Ratchet & Clank, Rift Apart, the studio has acquired some real momentum. Plenty of eyes are looking at what it's planning next after Rift Apart releases. Despite the lack of official announcements, it's pretty clear that one of the studio's next projects is the direct sequel to 2018's Marvel's Spider-Man. While Miles Morales was a worthy sequel/spin-off in its own right, the lack of any real DualSense integration felt like something of a missed opportunity. With the general lack of PS5 availability and the prevalence of Miles Morales PS5 bundles, plenty of PS5 owners went directly from the pack-in Astro's Playroom into Miles Morales. The difference in DualSense incorporation between Astro and Spider-Man is pretty vast. While Miles Morales definitely had some use of the adaptive triggers and 3D audio, playing the two games side by side, unfortunately, highlighted the lack of meaningful controller features in Miles Morales. Now that Returnal has set the bar so high with its use of the DualSense, the proverbial ball is in the courts of all other Sony-published studios. It has been made clear that Returnal's use of the controller is more than just a gimmick and adds to the overall immersion and ambience. What's more, it's made the game literally feel unique and memorable. The Spider-Man sequel would do well to use the lessons being taught by Returnal with its controller use. Luckily, it seems like Insomniac Games is already on board with using the DualSense for meaningful gameplay features in Ratchet & Clank: Rift Apart. Hopefully, with Spider-Man 2, the studio will use the combination of DualSense features that Rift Apart director Mike Daly highlighted when discussing the upcoming release. At this point, only time will tell if other studios will continue to take full advantage of the new hardware in ways other than what's in the PlayStation 5 itself. If Returnal is setting the stage for what's to come, however, then it seems like a new age of video game immersion might be just around the corner. Now there is a lot of confusion between roguelike and roguelite games after Returnal went viral on social media. The distinction between roguelite and roguelike games is very subtle and often murky, meaning that it's hard to determine which is which. But I think I have an answer here. The gaming world was recently taken by the storm thanks to games like The Binding of Isaac, Hades, and Returnal, to mention just a few of them. These games and more became quite popular, and a lot of players were introduced to the roguelike and roguelite genres precisely because of them. However, there is an important and game-defining distinction to be made between the two, and it's not uncommon at all for even the most passionate gamers to address roguelike titles as roguelites, as the discussion around Returnal shows, and vice versa. First of all though, there is a reason why these terms both contain the word rogue. Rogue was a game from 1980 that pioneered the elements of most roguelike titles, and it did so thanks to several criteria that were later considered to be the staple of roguelikes. So, roguelike games do exactly what they say on the tin: they are like Rogue. First and foremost, one of the most recognizable aspects of roguelike games is permadeath. Roguelites, on the other hand, do share some elements with roguelikes, but they also have some form of permanency in terms of items or currency acquired, or lack important features of their counterpart. Permadeath is not the only criteria for games to be considered roguelikes though. Other main features of any game that properly fall within the genre include procedurally generated levels or maps, high difficulty top-down dungeon crawling design, turn-based strategic combat, events described by text, and a handful of RPG elements. With all this in mind, a perfect example of a roguelike game is Darkest Dungeon, as it includes each and every criterion to be addressed as such. However, there are various games that are incorrectly labeled, or that operate in a somewhat gray area, meaning that they don't necessarily belong to either roguelikes or roguelites. These games can be defined as cross-genre or not pure roguelikes, and a prime example of this logic is Spelunky. Many players consider Spelunky a roguelike because of its permadeath, the procedurally generated levels, the dungeon crawling elements of the cave, and the fact that it is quite difficult, with death happening frequently. However, Spelunky is a game where events and combat are not turn-based, but rather happen in real time. Furthermore, it is a side-scrolling game, and it has limited RPG elements to it, with a form of graphic storytelling rather than a text-based one. Other games that are not exactly roguelike, but near the definition include The Binding of Isaac, for example. The game, long considered to be a roguelike, even by its creator, was instead labeled by fans as a roguelite because of how it is played in real time. Reportedly, this is specifically crucial when differentiating The Binding of Isaac from other games, because having good reflexes is enough to compensate for the lack of strategic planning, whereas inadequate reflexes can spoil a good run and a great strategy. Another element from TBOI that doesn't completely fit the roguelike genre is that there are permanent unlocks, and new items become available in between runs. Again, this is debatable because TBOI is much more roguelike than most other similar games. Dead Cells is another game that embraces most of the criteria for being classified as a roguelike, and yet, it too features permanent unlocks. It draws inspiration from the popular style of Metroidvania, that is, a combination of Metroid and Castlevania games, as well as the aforementioned The Binding of Isaac. The game comes with permadeath, of course, and players move in a dungeon and loot weapons, coins, treasures, and more. Dead Cells has a unique in-game currency called cells, which can be used during the run to permanently unlock items or upgrades, but players do lose all cells on death. Compared to TBOI, this is a sort of in-between feature, and Dead Cells' definition is probably more that of a roguelite game instead. Considering how murky things got, and how definitions can change, bend, and transform over time, the use of the term roguelike is nowadays both universal in a sense, and simultaneously oddly specific and niche-defining. As such, it will come as a surprise to many that two of the games mentioned at the beginning, namely, Hades and Returnal, are not exactly roguelike. Supergiant's Hades is often referred to as a roguelike game, and a quite successful one while at it, and on top of that even many fans of the genre still call it that to this day. The game's main character, Zagreus, the son of Hades, is trying to escape the underworld of Greek mythology and reach Mount Olympus, and this is achieved by completing a run. The combination of dungeon crawler elements, procedurally generated rooms and encounters, and the penalty of losing all items, Olympian boons, obels, the game's currency, and weapon upgrades all seem to confirm Hades' roguelike identity. However, that's not the case. The combat system in Hades is real-time hack and slash, which is quite opposite to the strategic, grid-based, turn-based combat typical of roguelike games. The obels can also be spent to make purchases that affect future runs, eventually improving the player's chances of success, and this includes upgrades, which makes the permadeath condition not really applicable due to Zagreus carrying something over when he dies. This makes Hades a roguelite, instead. Returnal is the new sci-fi shooter from Housemarque, and it is enjoying a well-deserved success. It is very comparable to Hades for a plethora of reasons, thanks to the most obvious aspect of drawing inspiration from Greek mythology to the presence of different biomes, from procedurally generated levels to the currency used, obelites in Returnal, from real-time combat to high difficulty and frequent deaths. As a matter of fact, Returnal 2 lets players carry something over from run to run in the form of ether, and strategy overall accounts for a small percentage of success if not paired with great reflexes to dodge the arcade-style attacks enemies launch at players. Roguelike games entail that players will always start from scratch after dying, and that's not Returnal's case, labeling it as a roguelite title. After all, I give the game a score of 9 out of 10, and I highly recommend you guys to get the game if you got a PlayStation 5. And that's all for the video, guys. Like and share the video for a bigger audience. Comment your thoughts on the discussed topics, and if you want to contribute to the channel by means of donation, the link to my PayPal is in the video's description. You can send me donations which will help me to make more contents consistently and new things such as gameplay, podcasts and live streaming. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, and until then from SMPV it's goodbye.